It gives me immense pleasure to introduce Dr. Madhu Guttu, who teaches in one of the colleges of Delhi University, and she's one of the few people who is working on acquisition of vocabulary. In fact, this is such an important area for all of us teachers, but it is also a neglected area. So, teachers, a very warm welcome, and to Madhu as well as to all of you. And now let me sort of get down to brass tacks, to work, because we have a lot of questions to ask Madhu and just 45 minutes. So Madhu, can you tell me where do we place vocabulary in language teaching?
Thank you, Anju, for the kind words. When we talk about vocabulary, actually it's the most central to the language learning process, because we need, we talk about the four skills of language learning: reading, writing, speaking, listening.
Yeah.
But actually, when you really come to think of it, we need words for everything.
True.
So the words have been neglected in the area of language learning. For example, structuralist mode of language learning and language teaching, and even later on, even the communicative language teaching syndrome. They talked about, they shifted the attention from form to function and communication.
And in
but
fact,
they hardly ever, kind of paid attention to vocabulary.
In fact, they totally neglected acquisition of vocabulary. It was just something which the people who were practitioners of communicative language teaching, it was nowhere in the picture. In fact, now, interestingly, Penny Ure, Madhu, has foregrounded vocabulary as part of communicative language teaching. So, after 20 and 30 years of realizing that we were not getting anywhere without some sort of teaching of vocabulary, that vocabulary learning and teaching is again foregrounded.
Yeah. And recently, in the 80s and 90s, there was this swing of the pendulum, and even lexical approaches came into being with people like Nation and Paul Mehra working on the area and doing a lot of research in the mental lexicon of the learners and the vocabulary acquisition process. So now, actually, fittingly, you can say that vocabulary is at the center of the language learning process. It's no longer on the periphery. So a lot of attention needs to be paid to vocabulary acquisition in the classroom for the learners as well as for the teachers.
Now, since you talked of the mental map, Madhu, is vocabulary learning a conscious process, or is it something which is very unconscious?
See, Anju, actually, vocabulary learning is both conscious and unconscious process. And I think in the second language classroom, it has to be addressed in both ways. For example, in the curriculum, it has to be made into a conscious process, where we talk about the direct learning and teaching of vocabulary. For example, you have word lists. Students, memorize word lists in isolation. They sometimes learn words through games, crossword puzzles, exercises, matching exercises. So they're consciously focusing on the learning of vocabulary.
So, Madhu, what I would like...
But language learning is also unconscious, and vocabulary learning is mainly unconscious when learners are looking for the message, looking for the communication. And actually, through concentrating on the message in an unconscious way, they imbibe the use of words, the knowledge of words, how to say it in context, how to say it grammatically, and which register to use it in, whether it's formal context or informal context. So, in a sense, theoretically we can make a distinction between conscious learning and unconscious learning.
True.
But actually in real life they overlap. See, when you read, you also write. When you listen, you also speak. So actually both the processes are happening at the same time. And language curriculum should make provision for both kinds of learning.
Okay, I just wanted to, in fact, I'm so sorry for trying to interrupt at that point, but this whole business of learning lists of words was something which we did when we were children, perhaps, and those were old, that is many years ago, and when the structuralist mode was really in vogue. So do you think this is acceptable to teach students lists of words? Would you say that that is an acceptable mode?
Yeah, no. See, that is also one of the acceptable modes now.
Okay.
Because now vocabulary learning, and Nation, who is a kind of great name, who has written, books on vocabulary learning and vocabulary teaching, and who has done a lot of extensive work also. His recommendation is that for second language learners, both ways of learning should be advised and encouraged.
Okay.
Focusing on message is important because then you have unconscious learning of words. But sometimes if you want to, because learning lists has one advantage, it has a disadvantage. That's why it's decried at times. But it has the advantage that it speeds up the learning of words.
Okay, though there may not be a context.
Yeah, but so though it's decontextualized, as you say.
Yeah.
So there has to be a kind of combination of both the approaches when we talk about acquisition of vocabulary learning.
Okay, Madhu, when would we say that we have learnt a word? When do we say our students have learnt these words?
Yeah, that's a very pertinent question, Anju. And actually when we say we have learnt a word, earlier we used to think word means you know the meaning of the word and we have learnt a word. But actually now, many kinds of language are subsumed when we say we have learnt a word. For example, to begin with, is a long list. Let me go over it one by one.
Okay.
First of all, when we say we have learnt a word, we mean the spoken form of the word, which means the pronunciation and the stress on that word. So for example, if I say important, I should know what is the pronunciation, which syllable is stressed, which syllable is unstressed.
Okay. So learning the word, one of the important factors, teachers, and this is often neglected, is the pronunciation and the stress patterns. So when you teach words, please make sure that they don't say I don't even know how to pronounce it.
But they should not say methodology, but they should say methodology.
Yes.
So
and they should not say
fall on the correct syllable.
And they shouldn't say biology, but they should say biology. We even hear of teachers of biology say biology, and that's not learning a word. Okay, that's a good point.
So spoken form is one. Second comes the written form, by which we understand the spelling of the words.
Okay.
So for example, if I use the word mean, somewhere I should know that mean is not M-E-E-N, but it is M-E-A-N.
Okay.
So that also goes into the knowledge of word.
Okay. So with the computer and the spell check, it is still important, teachers, to emphasize on the spelling of words. A lot of kids I know these days say, oh, we don't really need to know the spelling because we have the spell check on the computer. But no, to know a word means that you know the pronunciation of the word, the stress pattern, as well as the spelling of the word. Okay. So
then
second
third, very important thing, we should also know the grammatical information about a word.
Okay.
For example, and the grammatical constraints on a word use. For example, mean. We know that mean is also a verb. First of all, we have to have this information. Then we also should know that mean also there is a constraint on the use of the verb mean. For example, I can't say Madhu is meaning honey in English. I can only say Madhu means honey in English.
Okay.
So all this information also is part of the knowledge of a word.
Okay. So grammatical knowledge is also important. So we cannot say I have many golds in my locker. I like many sugars in my tea, or 2 sugars in my tea.
Certainly not.
We need to know whether it is a countable noun, a mass noun, which of the nouns take some kind of 2 spoons of sugar, for instance, takes this kind of a prefix.
Yeah.
And so all this information becomes very important.
Important, yeah.
Okay.
Certainly.
So the grammatical information.
Yeah.
So pronunciation is something that we need to be careful about, the spelling and
then
the
grammatical information. Which part of speech does the word belong to?
Okay.
And what are the constraints of grammar on the use of that word?
Okay. All right.
Then certainly, as I think everyone understands the word knowledge to be, meaning of course is a central part of the word knowledge.
Yes.
But there also not just the basic meaning. We also talk about the extended meaning. For example, let's take the same example of mean. What meaning is to have a concept. That's the basic meaning, literal meaning. But then you can also have an extended meaning. You can say, okay, she didn't mean to hurt you, so why are you feeling so bad?
Yeah.
So here mean means intent.
But what about something like, oh, she's a mean person?
Yeah, then in that case, then we'll talk about two different words, because we'll say these are homophones. They have the same sound, M-E-A-N, they have the same spelling, but they will be listed in the dictionary as two different words.
Okay.
So this is an accident of English language, that many words which may have the same spelling sometimes, which may have the same pronunciation, but they are actually different words. So the dictionary will kind of put them in different slots.
Okay, so then there are two separate words that we learn separately, right?
Yeah. And then another important area which has been actually neglected so far in the word knowledge, that is the use of collocation.
Okay.
And collocation, many people may not be aware of. Basically it means when two words gradually keep company, you find them again and again together. For example, when you want to say mean, you can say she means well, meaning she has good intentions.
Yes.
But I cannot substitute well by another word which has a similar meaning. I cannot say she means nicely.
Yes.
So these are kind of, this will come under collocation of a word.
Okay. Okay.
And I think this has to be emphasized a lot, because this is one area which has been thoroughly neglected so far.
Madhu, would you explain to the teachers what you mean by collocation?
Yeah. See, again, collocation basically means sometimes you have an adjective, you have a noun, and a particular noun will go with a particular adjective. For example, in English, when we talk about tea, we say this is strong tea, this is weak tea. I like my tea strong, I like my tea weak.
Yes.
Though collocationally, other words, I cannot say I like my tea parlous, because parlous also is equal to weak.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. I cannot say I like my tea powerful or mighty tea. I can only say strong tea.
Yes.
Okay. And again, heavy tea will have a different collocation. Strong tea will have a different collocation, in which the brew has been kind of become very, we let it brew for a long time, and the decoction is very strong. Sorry for my coughing.
I'm so sorry to call you on a day when you're not well.
So these are collocations. So certain words go along with certain other words.
Yes.
So the way words keep company.
Yeah. So that is what collocation means. So collocation, a neglected area in vocabulary teaching, is to be emphasized, that certain words only go with certain other words. Like certain parts of speech, certain words will only sort of fall together, with certain other words.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Just now you have used this expression fall together.
Yeah.
You will not say fall with each other.
Yes.
You will use the expression fall together.
Yes.
So fall together itself is an example of a collocation. Then another thing that we have to keep in mind is the frequency of word use. We should know how frequently a word is used and in what context. For example, mean is a word or very high frequency.
Okay.
It is used in so many different contexts, and so it's very, very important for language teachers and for language learners to pay a lot of attention to words of high frequency.
And why do we need to pay attention? Why do teachers need to pay attention to words of high frequency?
Yes, very good question, Anju, because basically we think that a word like mean, okay, we know the meaning of mean, so why do you look this up in dictionary? But I think these are the words, again, words like look and put and take and go and come, because they form so many phrases, they are used in so many different contexts. We have got phrasal verbs with them, and because we think we know them, we never kind of take the time out to look them up in the dictionary. So that's why it becomes very, very important for us.
Okay.
Because they are used in so many different contexts with so many different meanings.
Okay. So what you're trying to suggest is that because of their immense usage, and we can play with these words so much, they add to the creativity of the language.
Yes, right.
So it is very, very important that we use this, that we are aware of how frequently certain words are used. In fact, one would imagine, Madhu, that frequently used words will not actually lead to a lot of creativity. But from what you're saying, and I now see the point, that actually these frequently used words would lead to so much creativity in the language.
Because again, if you take up a word like make, everyone knows, okay, we know the meaning of make. I made a dress, I made this. But then you have so many kind of phrasal verbs with this. You make for something. And you make out something. So there are so many meanings, extended meanings, which are formed with these words of high frequency. And then words of low frequency, they are many more, but they normally are helpful if we are going into a specialized area. So then you have to learn those words. There I think even list learning is helpful. Because those words are not used very often. And if you really go over a page or 2 pages of a text, you will find 80% of the time it's words of high frequency that are used. Words of low frequency naturally will be used, will not be repeated even say in 2 pages or 3 pages. But they are important because because sometimes we cannot guess at their meaning. But we have to know, and we should not kind of then align with this is another concept of register. We should know whether a word is used in formal context or informal context. For example, if I have to ask you, did you have your breakfast or did you have a cup of tea? You can say I had 2 cups of tea, but you can also say I consumed 2 cups of tea, which will be inappropriate because consume is a word which normally will be used in a formal context. So we can say, if we are talking about statistics and talking about consumption of these items, sugar and rice and wheat, we can say, okay, so many kilos of sugar are consumed every day. Then we won't say are had every day. Then, because it's a formal context, maybe it occurs in a newspaper report or some article, then we'll use words which are used in formal context. So again, for the language learners and language teachers, it's very, very important to know which words are used in formal context and which words are used in informal context.
Otherwise, one would sound highly artificial, a little and funny, in fact.
Funny.
If we say that we've consumed 10 cups of tea, we would sound funny. We've sounded ridiculous.
And that's what we say. Sometimes we used to say that second language learners speak bookish language. That language does not sound natural because basically we do not know which words belong to formal context and which words belong to informal context. So
Okay.
that's again an important area.
Yes.
So let me just go over, because it's a long list.
Yeah.
So all these, so now teachers can see and learners can see, when we say we know a word, actually we subsume all this knowledge. We have to know the spoken form, we
Yes.
have to know the written form, we have to know the meaning, sometimes even extended meaning, then we have to know collocation, we have to know grammatical information, we have to know which register a word belongs to, we have also to know how frequently a word is used. And in this context, I would like to point your attention to the fact that the modern dictionaries, which are based on the language learning principles and language teaching principles, they give the information against every word. This word has this frequency, it's used, say 500, because they're based on the actual data.
Okay.
For example, Coble started
Yes.
this process,
Yeah.
and now Longman Dictionary, Macmillan Dictionary, Oxford Advanced Learners Dictionary, they all try to give this information as part of the word entry.
Yes, and just to take off from some of the points that you made, one point that I would like to ask you, what is the difference between specialized vocabulary and jargon? You know,
Yeah.
people say, oh, we know the jargon of, say, chemistry or physics or whatever, and then there is specialized vocabulary. So is it interchangeable, or so let's enlighten our teachers
Yeah.
to that.
See, in a sense, even the words jargon and specialized vocabulary, there is a difference in our attitude when we use these words. Specialized vocabulary, basically we have a sense that it's a kind of positive, our attitude is positive. That every discipline, say it's music or literature or linguistics or medicine or pharmacy or biology, zoology, they will have words which will be used only in those contexts when we are talking about these disciplines. Normally not otherwise. And jargon is a kind of, has got a pejorative meaning.
Okay.
Pejorative basically means that we almost, someone is talking some kind of specialized vocabulary only, but in different contexts and not simplifying its vocabulary. So we say, okay, this person always talks jargon.
Jargon, yeah.
For example, even when we are talking here, we are using these words. Meaning has denotation, meaning has connotation, frequency. In a sense, it is specialized vocabulary because it comes from the language teaching discipline. But someone, if a lay person is listening to it and we are not simplifying this, the person will say, okay, this person is using jargon because not explaining the verse to us.
Yeah.
So sometimes jargon and specialized vocabulary, they can overlap, but jargon basically means that it has a pejorative meaning, and technical vocabulary being just kind of flaunted in a sense.
Okay.
And
so,
not really explained.
Okay,
to
so-
some extent, though it's a very subtle distinction between
yeah,
the two.
so it's technical vocabulary being flaunted, as you said,
Yeah.
and it's not taking into consideration the listener,
audience, yeah, the
the
listener.
audience,
Yeah, the
or the reader,
Yeah.
because we basically want people to understand us, but when
Yeah.
we actually want to confuse and show off,
Yeah.
that's when we use
Yeah,
jargon.
we
Is that
say-
right?
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
To some extent, yeah.
To some extent.
Yeah.
All right. There are these two words, receptive and productive vocabulary. What do you
Yeah.
mean by receptive and productive vocabulary? Teachers are familiar, teachers of CTE
Yeah.
are very familiar with these words.
Yeah.
Some words have to be part of the passive vocabulary,
Yeah.
or the
Yeah.
receptive vocabulary,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
some have to be part of the active vocabulary.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
See, basically receptive vocabulary and productive vocabulary also, since we have gone over what we understand when we say we understand a word, and we know a word, receptive vocabulary will mean that I know the word mean. Sometimes if I see it, say, if in writing and someone writes M-E-E-N, then somewhere I feel, okay, no, it doesn't look right.
Okay.
I may not even be sure of the correct spelling. but something in me, I have that much familiarity with the word that I know, okay, this doesn't sound right, this doesn't look right. Then again, if I find it in a grammatical context which is not correct, then I can say, okay, this doesn't seem right. I may not be able to say it rightly, but I have this sense, I am able to recognize something when it's wrong, when it's not right. Productive vocabulary will be, I know, I can recall it when I want to. In receptive vocabulary, you may not be able to recall a word when you really need to use it. But productive vocabulary, I know, okay, now I need this word mean, now I know I want to use this word intend, and I am able to use them. So when I know completely how to say a word, how to write a word, how to use a word in grammatical context, how to collocate it well, which register I want to use it in, that will be productive knowledge.
Yes,
but then again, let me just go on a bit. Receptive knowledge is important when your goal is a large chunk of vocabulary. You want to have lots and lots of vocabulary at your command, okay, but you have a kind of, because still it's not productive knowledge, but you know when you read it. So when you are reading something, when you are listening to something, your receptive knowledge comes to play.
Yes.
Comes to the forefront. But when you are writing, when you are speaking, then you need productive knowledge. But in real life context, again, I'll say that receptive knowledge and productive knowledge, they overlap.
And teachers have to be pretty conscious of the fact that, you know, you cannot teach each and every word in the text, and probably the students don't require it, because here again the frequency that you talked of, the frequency of occurrence of words comes into play. So a lot of words can just be part of the receptive vocabulary, and the teachers have to make a judicious choice that okay, these are the words that need to be taught and become part of the productive vocabulary, and these are the students can make do by just having receptive knowledge of these words. For instance, Madhu, even when we read the newspapers, we do not require we do not know the meaning of each and every word, but yet we are able to understand the words from the context. You know, so context also plays a very important role. The other thing that I wanted to, Madhu, though we may have productive knowledge of several words, but yet from time to time the word may not come, at the top of our mind. So we then use this ability to paraphrase. So what is this ability to paraphrase, which is very important even in language teaching? Can you just enlighten the teachers?
See, you have said two very important things, Sanju. And one thing is, in teaching, what are the things we kind of pay special attention to? So we have to develop this awareness about language learners, which was to be kept for receptive knowledge, which was to be paid more attention to. And then also many times when we are trying to use a word, we cannot recall a word, then how do we use paraphrase? For example, this is kind of more natural with verse, sometimes with technical verse also. Sometimes I may not be able to, even kind of recall a word like, okay, folk. I want a folk. So then I think I'll use the ability to paraphrase. Okay, see, what do you call it? I want something which goes okay with knife. This is what normally the English people use. Normally we eat with our fingers, but this is a kind of implement, something like a spoon which has got divisions in it. So something like that, I will use my ability to use language to paraphrase when I can't get a word right.
Okay, and this ability to paraphrase actually does not show that you do not know the language, but it shows that you have a fairly good command of the language. Is that right?
That's right. And I think that in that connection, I would also like to point out to our teachers, many times when our learners look up a bilingual dictionary, then they get the word, okay, which can be a useful strategy to learn language, but sometimes if they look up a monolingual dictionary, that is English to English dictionary, then they learn the use of paraphrasing. For example, even a word like spoon, because there is no equivalent to spoon in English, the dictionary will give a definition which will be a paraphrase of the word. So sometimes it's useful, again it depends on the discretion of the teacher. Sometimes it's easy to tell the word in Hindi, but sometimes if the students are taken through a dictionary, they also see how they use the language. So paraphrasing ability, I think, is a very important part of language learning, because there you are playing around with the language.
Okay. Now let's talk about storage, Madhu. Do you think words are stored in semantic networks? Let's use some jargon now.
Yes.
Do you think words are...
The specialized vocabulary for us, but for a lay person, but I think right now it will be specialized vocabulary.
Yes, yeah.
And semantic networks basically mean that in our minds we have associations of meaning. Semantic basically means related to meaning. Networks means associations. So for example, when we think of a word like night, the semantic networks, we also are aware of words like darkness. We are aware of words like, that sky comes to our mind. Many other activities also comes to our mind. We also think of day in opposition, because night is in opposition to day. So sometimes in language teaching and vocabulary teaching, it's a good idea to have cluster of words and to have associational networks for our learners. So they have a word and then they have associated vocabulary along with that, because that also in a sense contextualizes the use of the word, and also in our mind, that's what the research says, we store words in these semantic networks.
Okay.
When we know night, somewhere in our mind we also have the concept of day. We also have the concept of darkness. We also have the concept of sky. We also have the concept of stars, because we see the stars and the moon at night, not in daytime.
Okay. So that's how the words are stored.
Yeah.
So the exercise types. So this brings us to the next point about exercise types.
Yes.
The exercise types should not be meanings of single words. They should be actually in semantic networks.
Yes.
So in the sense that if you have something like, let's think of another word.
Let's think of sweetness.
Yes.
Let's think of sweetness.
Yeah.
So you think of sugar also, you think of
Honey.
ice cream also, you think of honey also. You also think of bitterness.
And
You
sour.
also-
Yes.
Yeah, sourness.
Yeah.
So all the related ideas also come to your mind.
Yes. So that's how
Yeah.
teachers, we would suggest that you teach vocabulary. Now, what is the role of the first language? In fact, you did mention this big business of a bilingual dictionary and a monolingual dictionary. What is the role of the first language in language acquisition for second language learners?
See, first language is also not to be discounted at all, because somewhere we find that words are stored in our mind, which we call a mental lexicon. Lexicon basically means a kind of dictionary. And L1 lexicon and L2 lexicon are not entirely different. There are kind of connections between the two. So we make use of L1 in two ways. One thing, the prior knowledge of our vocabulary in first language. It can be, kind of told to the students, to the learners, that just as, for example, word building processes, we have a word like sweet. We can make sweetness out of it by adding NESS. We also can say sweetly. Anyway, we don't have a word like unsweet. And we also have a word formation like sweeten. We can also tell them that in their own language also such processes work. We have a word like madhur. We have a word like madhurta. So they can see that vocabulary, in a sense, we have word formation processes in their language, and the same operates in the second language also. So there is a sense of familiarity. There is no sense of alienness. Second thing that's important, sometimes translation, which was earlier decried upon, that can also be used sometimes in a classroom. Sometimes paraphrasing ability is good, but sometimes we can give the translation equivalent to our learners, which facilitates the learning of the word in the second language. And another thing, it is also good to make them aware of how different words perform in the two languages. For example, I can say in English, I am interested in music. And interested may not have an equivalent in their first language if I am talking of Hindi. Hindi will say it differently. मुझे music में रुचि है, मुझे music अच्छी लगती है. So for them sometimes just bringing to their attention these two phrases, they can see that sometimes two languages say the same thing in different words. So they can learn the different structures also in which these words are learned.
Okay. So let's go on to something which is recent research which is happening in vocabulary acquisition, and that is lexical phrases more than words that are being highlighted. So what is the research, Madhu? Can you update our teachers?
See, 1988, a linguist Nattinger, he brought out a book and he talked about lexical phrases, which is again kind of very innovative feature in vocabulary acquisition. And he talked about language learning to be a compositional process. See, what basically he said was, to simplify it, that learners, when they learn a language, they do not always store words in isolation. In their mind, they store words in phrases, sometimes in sentences also. And so he says in language teaching also, and in the case of second language teaching, these kind of phrases should also become the focus of attention. For example, he talked about polyphrases, which are idioms, where you cannot analyze the meaning from parts. You have an expression like kick the bucket. It does not, if you translate literally, it has a different meaning, but when you say kick the bucket, it means die, in informal language. Then again, phrasal verbs. Sometimes you cannot deduce the meaning, but they occur together. Then he also talked about different semi-fixed formulas. For example, greetings, how are you? So normally you learn how separately, you learn are separately, you learn you separately also. But many times they come together. How are you? I'm fine, thank you. How is it doing? How are you doing? So see you later, goodbye, bye. So these expressions, he said, that they are stored in our mind as phrases. Then many other phrases also which we use in social interaction. For example, when we are talking to each other, we are giving clues. As far as I am concerned, let me see, to be very frank, between you and me. So these phrases, he suggested that these are stored in our mind, and these should be taught to the learners as phrases, not as separate lexical items. And he says these are the phrases which make for fluency in language use. Because when we are using language, we are not putting one word with another word, then another word. We are making use of most of these phrases. And if we look through any talk, we'll find these phrases occur again and again, and they make for fluent conversation.
Yes. So this is a totally neglected and a very new area actually.
This is a
very new area, because we never thought of teaching these kind of phrases, you know. These were something which even all my years and with my years of language teaching as well, that I never thought that we would be teaching that, you know, furthermore, and between you and me.
To be frank.
To be frank with you. And so these are very interesting techniques, and what the teacher needs to probably do is make a list of such words and have practice sessions where some of these words are used so that they become part of the children's lexicon. And it is also leads to fluency in the language, you know, and gives a lot of confidence to the students that these kind of words. All right, final question. I think we have time just for the last question. What are the learning techniques that the learners need to use and the teachers need to also be aware of?
Learning techniques make mainly for the second language. Looking up a dictionary is a must. And when we look up a dictionary, all kinds of knowledge of word that we have already talked about can be had at one glance. And the students should be encouraged to look up the dictionary and also the words of high frequency, as we have earlier talked about, as many times as possible. This is a really treasure house for us and we should not neglect it. Second very important strategy is guessing at the meaning of a word. That, I think, has to be practiced, and whenever we meet an unknown word in a passage, we should try to figure out what is the part of speech. Then we should look at the immediate context in which a word occurs, and from other words that we know, we should try to deduce, will it be similar, will it be opposite. Then we should also have a wider context. We should look at the clauses, whether there is a contrast implied, where there is reinforcement implied, whether there is cause and effect relationship implied, and that also help us fix the meaning of the word. Then we should try to make a kind of guess at the word. Sometimes it may be, so we will not know the exact meaning, it will be near about the meaning. And then later on we can look at the word in the dictionary, because most of the times when we are reading we may not have a dictionary at hand. So this strategy should be developed and taught as far as possible. And then learning, doing crosswords, all these things, looking at word games, all these are techniques of learning words.
Okay, thank you, Madhu. This was a very enlightening talk. We learned a lot about a very neglected area in language acquisition and language learning, which is vocabulary. We just take it for granted that teachers would pick up words and then teach it to the students, and the students would just learn these words. And actually you have said that vocabulary is seminal to language teaching, albeit it has been a neglected area. And you've talked very interestingly about collocation, again a neglected area. You've also talked about lexical phrases. All these things make for easy learning. In fact, lexical phrases is something which the teachers can just give a list of and help them practice, and it could be funny games as well. So thanks a lot, Madhu, for this enlightening talk, and I'm very sorry that you were not well and had to come. Thank you very much, teachers.